Hello, this is international football commentator Derek Ray, and you're listening to the Ranks FC podcast.
Hello, Rank Squad, and welcome to Ranks FC. It's your favourite intercontinental transatlantic football podcast. My name is Jack Collins, and I will be your host today. And joining me across the water, all the way from San Diego, it's the one and only Mr. Dean Jones. How you doing, mate?
Hello, mate. Yeah, not bad at all. Probably better than any Real Madrid fans out there anyway. But yeah, we are in that weird stage, really, in podcast season where all the club business is kind of sorted now. Like, there's obviously a couple of things that need addressing, but we know most of what's going to play out in the next couple of weeks, and we're also starting to get into World Cup mode. So yeah, we've decided that given we've done so many, particularly like Champions League takeaways recently, that we should probably do a little drop on World Cup and where we start to see this heading, what the early signs are for how this World Cup pans out. So today we're going to have a little bit of a mix. We'll start off with some domestics, just in things we love, but then the majority of this podcast is going to get stuck into the World Cup and what we should expect from the teams that we either root for, we either are going to be watching through. I mean, you obviously don't want England to win, but you're going to have to watch all the England games, or those teams that we actually are expecting to try to go all the way.
The favourites, shall we say, as well as the kind of home nations. So we'll have a little look at what's going down. It's going to be very exciting. We're going to do routes to the World Cup final today. But before we get stuck into that, Dean, I think we should probably talk about Real Madrid. Things we love, not necessarily things we love here, but things that are stealing the headlines, I think is probably a more appropriate title for this. Obviously, we talked about the Clásico, Barcelona winning the league, what next for Real Madrid on our Patreon episode on Monday, the post box. We'd love to have you over on Patreon if you can. It's a couple of extra podcasts every single week, your opportunity to get your questions into us, and it helps to support us over here at Rank. So we'd love you to get over there and join us, especially ahead of the World Cup where things are going to get really, really busy in there. But the link is in the description if you want to come and join us. We'd love to have you. But Dean, let's talk about Real Madrid, because it feels like this story is continually in motion. There are reports coming out today as we record on Tuesday that Jose Mourinho is edging ever closer to being named as the next Real Madrid manager, a return to the Bernabeu for him. There was also the news that Perez has come out, Florentino Perez, and given a press conference. A lot of people thought he was going to resign because of the timing of it and the fact that it felt like an emergency. He opened with, "I hate to disappoint you, but I am not going to be resigning." Also cleared up some rumours going around about him being in ill health, said he was perfectly fine, but he has announced an election. Now, he has not been opposed in the previous 4 elections at Real Madrid. He said, look, there's people scheming against me. If they want to scheme against me, come out and do it in the open. Yeah. Don't do it in the shadows. So we've got a presidential election on top of all the other chaos going on. Should we try and dissect it a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. Perez saying today, "I am the president with the most titles in football history. Do not forget that." I mean, you are also in charge of Real Madrid, so that is that you're supposed to at least be coming close to that at that point. But look, Real Madrid are in crisis. Players literally fighting each other, losing a Clásico at the hands of Barca, who then clinch the title in front of their eyes, obviously, and then go on their parade the following day. And they're just way, way off it. A 14-point margin now separates them in La Liga. Obviously not good enough. And the narrative around Jose Mourinho returning to Real Madrid has been building over the past couple of weeks, particularly since Xabi Alonso left the club. It was mooted at the time that Mourinho could come in. I think it seemed a lot sillier then than it does now. Obviously, Alvaro Arbeloa took charge in January, but just hasn't, I'd say, got the clout to do this job. It's one of the hardest jobs in football, because not only have you got to be a wizard at like understanding the game and the tactics. You've also got to be a mastermind in terms of controlling this group of players and the narratives and the storylines and the fan base as well. So there's not many people that can do that. So slowly but surely, Mourinho has pushed his name further into the picture. Florentino Perez has had his head wrapped around this for a couple of weeks now. And they're now going to start to wrap up this deal to get Mourinho through the door to be Real Madrid manager next season and try to claw back some of this gap that's been opening up with Barcelona. Now, obviously, Jose Mourinho currently is in charge of Benfica. There's a clause that can be activated if they wanted to get him out before that expires. But ultimately, Mourinho told Real Madrid that he would be ready to come, willing to come. And while, as I say, I don't know in footballing terms that this will turn out to make sense. There just aren't many people in the world that can understand what this level of management takes. Like Xabi Alonso was obviously a very different type of coach to Carlo Ancelotti. Carlo Ancelotti had his critics for the way that he would set up a team and the way that he had a lack of structure, if you like. But then Xabi Alonso tried to turn things around 180 and go to a very structured tactical outfit. Didn't ultimately have the same buy-in or maybe the same style of players that he needed to carry out what he'd done with Bayer Leverkusen, and it just hasn't worked for him. He lost his job, and now Mourinho will come in and the vibes will be important again, and he's got to win back player respect, fan respect, bring everybody back together and bring back that us against the world mentality that ultimately is what made him special in the first place, I guess.
It's a weird one, isn't it? And part of me is looking at this and thinking, what are Real Madrid trying to get out of it? Right, so I take your point here about the fact that there aren't many people that understand the gravitas of that role and what it entails. Although I do think that there are others on the market. I've been quite forward with my idea that I think that Didier Deschamps might be the perfect man to step in there at this point, coming off the back of his tenure as France manager. But maybe more than that, I'm a little bit concerned that what we've seen over at Real Madrid over the past couple of weeks has been a complete meltdown in so many different ways. We've had teammates fighting each other in the dressing room. We've had Tchouaméni and Valverde at blows, so much so that Valverde was ruled out of the Clásico, and then Tchouaméni started on the right wing. We've had reports that Kylian Mbappe has snapped at a member of the training staff, and then we've had this entire furore around Mbappe going on holiday. And look, you can think any of these things are overblown or underblown or whatever. It doesn't really matter. The point is that there are stories coming out of the Real Madrid dressing room, left, right, and center, with people unhappy. Rudiger fighting people, Carreras coming out and saying that he's unhappy with the coach and his playing time since Alonso was replaced. All of it points to a deeply unhappy dressing room, and it's kind of culminated in this Clásico win where Real Madrid have seen Barcelona lift the title in front of them. They've seen them win back-to-back, and it's the second consecutive season where they haven't won any silverware. So obviously the club isn't in a great place. The cynic in me looks back at the last time Jose Mourinho was in charge, and obviously he was coming into not the same situation, but a similar one, in that Real Madrid had just gone 2 seasons without a trophy and immediately bought this kind of, I suppose, antagonistic style to what they were. We all remember him poking Tito Villanueva in the eye on the touchline, and some of the press conferences, those incredible kind of 4 Clásicos in a row, etc., etc. Obviously, they set a points record under him that was then smashed the year after by Barcelona. But you look at it and you think, what happened at the end of that? And it was effectively a major fallout, a lot of old players leaving the club, the major bust up with Iker Casillas, etc., etc., etc. The cynic in me thinks Real Madrid are bringing in Mourinho to clear shop, that they're going to need to get rid of 4 or 5 players this summer who might not want to leave the club and who have been involved in a dressing room that ultimately knows that player power is the key. Right. And I think it's notable that Florentino Perez today came out in his speech and said, we have the highest value squad in the world, according to Transfermarkt. And everyone's sort of looking at him going like, yeah, and what? Arguably that makes the weight of the failure in this season worse rather than better, if I'm honest, Florentino. But you're looking at it and thinking, what are they going to do here? Because, the report saying that Tchouaméni and Valverde can't be in the same team next year. There was already talk of Camavinga leaving. There was already talk of Dani Ceballos leaving. They're going to have to get rid of some left backs. There's this constant question over whether Vinicius Jr. and Mbappe can play in the same team and both be successful. There's a lot of players here who might end up on the edge. We've got the rumours that Toni Kroos is potentially coming back in some sort of boardroom role to help oversee the next generation. And I don't really know what any of it adds up to right now. But there is definitely a part of my brain going, Florentino is bringing Mourinho in to ruffle some feathers and potentially get some people out of this club rather than bringing him in to unify a dressing room, which has never really been Jose Mourinho's strength.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point. And we know that anyway, they've been considering some key signings. It also is, we talked about this a bit on Patreon the other day, if you can win Mourinho over, then he'll die for you publicly. He'll go out and protect you and defend you. But equally, we know he'll throw people under the bus if he has to. And there's half of that Real Madrid team at the moment that feels like kind of deserve to be thrown under a bus because of the way that, we're reading again, like Perez talked about it today, that the leaks that have been emerging, finger pointing has started. I don't think we should be naming names that are being mentioned here, but they're out there. People are starting to be pointed out as the mole in the camp and these sorts of things. And Prime Mourinho was like, I think he kind of thrived on that sort of stuff. I don't know if he will anymore. He's 60 odd years old, and there comes a point in your life where you do start to get a bit tired. And I think even going back to, if you think back to when he was at Tottenham and the documentary stuff that came out, you could see that even by then he was a different version of Mourinho than the one that came through at Chelsea, Real Madrid. And so what do we get now? I agree with you that there is definitely an increased chance of an overhaul. But maybe there is also a part of Mourinho that thinks, now I can also do this with this group because this sort of underperformed to an extreme level.
Yeah, I mean, they have. And that's kind of where we've got to. But equally, we're at a strange point with them. How is Vinicius Jr. going to take Mourinho coming in after the entire saga around Prestiani, who's obviously now been accused of and convicted of homophobic abuse rather than racist abuse? And Mourinho was kind of sort of an enabler in that situation, right? And we spoke about it at the time. We spoke about it in a kind of solo podcast of just being like, I don't really want to talk about the football. That felt at that moment. And look, a month before that, with football, kind of becoming slightly more physical, particularly in the Premier League, but I think in the Champions League as well, I wondered if there might be a space for Mourinho. And after that, there seemed like there was absolutely no way that anyone in kind of a sane mind or a clean bill of health mentally would be looking at Mourinho and saying, yeah, that's the person to come in and kind of calm the inflamed tensions at this club and move them forward. I think there was a point where, last season when Real Madrid were dumped out of the Champions League by an Arsenal side that had come kind of from nowhere in the 5 years prior. If you'd been looking at those two teams, a couple of years beforehand and said, yeah, Arsenal will knock Real Madrid out of the Champions League at the business end of proceedings after they signed Kylian Mbappe, you would have been, the people would have been sending for the men in white coats. And yet it was a structured, well-disciplined Arsenal performance that just completely took Real Madrid apart. So they moved forward into this year with this idea of bringing in a coach who, maybe wasn't quite as much of someone who was going to be able to rule the dressing room with his vibe, but was going to try and bring in a tactical kind of revolution to bring Real Madrid into the modern era in some regards, which has kind of happened on the side of where they've been. And this isn't to downplay any of Ancelotti's achievements. He's been an exceptional coach for such a long period of time. Then I think that sometimes it's kind of tactical now does get overlooked, but he was able to get the best out of this team in a number of different ways in the previous years. And it felt like that wasn't enough anymore. It wasn't enough to just have the superstars. The players then rebel effectively against a coach who tries to impose more of tactical discipline on them. And they go back to someone who's just sort of there to keep everybody happy in the dressing room or attempt to keep everybody happy in the dressing room. I don't know if this move to bring back in Jose Mourinho is going to address the root cause of all of this. But again, he's come in there before and he has achieved successes. Maybe I'm reading too deeply into it. And ultimately, he's someone with a long history of success, even if it has been kind of tapered in recent years, and who knows the club incredibly well and who will bring an authority to the dressing room that very much isn't there at the moment. And we can see that in all of these stories leaking.
Yeah, totally. Look, for the last word on this, I mean, let's give it to Barcelona, because they don't deserve really for Real Madrid to have all of the limelight right now. All the headlines today are Real Madrid, Real Madrid, Real Madrid after a terrible season. And I know that that's why we're talking about them, but Barcelona have done it, and they've done it in style. The second half of the season that they've produced has been brilliant. Hansi Flick deserves so much credit for what they've been capable of achieving and going on to win La Liga for the second season in a row. And yeah, a big achievement, particularly to get that moment over the line in a Clásico.
Yeah, first time ever Barcelona have won the league in a Clásico. It's only happened once before. I think it was Real Madrid in the 20s or 30s when things weren't quite as heated. So, yeah, an unbelievable achievement. And what Hansi Flick has done with this group of players, what, he's been able to pull through out of the academy, be able to kind of forge them into a family. And I know there was a bit of kind of left and right on this on Barcelona's social media channels last week compared to what was going down at Real Madrid. The big pictures of them all smiling, one big happy family, did make me laugh. But more than that, what an achievement, and what he's done as the coach of this side in the last 2 years deserves so much credit. He has come in there, he has worked it out with so many of the La Masia graduates or young players that were brought into the club, and given them that kind of sense of togetherness, but also has brought in, incredible style of football that has taken them right to the top of La Liga 2 years in a row, to the latter stages of the Champions League. And I think that this is only the beginning of what looks like a very special era for Barcelona. And again, if you'd said this after Real Madrid had gone and won the double, they'd brought in Kylian Mbappe and Barcelona were in all sorts of financial disarray, people would have been laughing at you. But Hansi Flick has managed to turn things around so incredibly well. He deserves nothing but credit, and especially on a weekend where he lost his father, to be there and the full range of emotions, just a kind of incredible thing to be able to pull together, and obviously thoughts with Hansi Flick and his family at what must be an incredibly difficult time as well. But yeah, the job he has done with Barcelona is nothing short of remarkable. Just quickly before we move on to the World Cup, I wanted to highlight something in the Bundesliga. We've been talking about relegation battles, and I've been enthralled with what's going on in La Liga. Obviously, we have a two-horse race at the bottom of the Premier League between sworn rivals in Tottenham and West Ham United. But at the bottom of the Bundesliga, things are just as chaotic. And Pauli lost at the weekend, which actually put them bottom of the Bundesliga. There is one match day to go in the Bundesliga, and the 16th place team goes into a relegation playoff against the third team from the Zweite Bundesliga, the second tier, and the 17th and 18th are relegated automatically. Heidenheim looked dead and buried. But as we go into the final week of the season, Wolfsburg are in the playoff place in 16th with 26 points. Heidenheim are 17th with 26 points. And Pauli are 18th with 26 points. On the final day, Wolfsburg go to St. Pauli at the Millantor in what looks like a shootout. And Heidenheim, who have only lost one of their last 7 after an absolutely horrendous start to the season, won again, this time over Cologne, in order to pull themselves into the position where if they win against Mainz on the final day, they have a shot of being in the playoff, and they look completely done. So this final day at the bottom of the Bundesliga, Wolfsburg traveling to St. Pauli, Heidenheim hosting Mainz, and it's just everyone on the same points. Whoever picks up the most points wins. It's just an incredible way with one game remaining in the season. I've never seen anything quite like this before.
Yeah, that is fun. That's your games to watch then, isn't it, mate? That's going to be your full focus of all your attention this weekend, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, there's the small matter of the Scottish Premier League being decided as well, potentially between Hearts and Celtic on Saturday if they both get through their midweek games. The FA Cup final this weekend promises to be something special, but I imagine that one's on fewer people's radars, so I just wanted to point it out a little bit. Right, we're going to take a break there. When we come back on the other side, let's get stuck in to the World Cup and these routes to the final. Stick with us here on Ranks FC. Welcome back to Ranks FC. Jack Collins and Dean Jones alongside you. We're going to get stuck into this World Cup. Dean, this is a DJ-led podcast. I'm going to throw to you to explain what you're going to walk us through.
Yeah, I just think it's important that we all have an understanding of what is possible at this World Cup, whether it's from an emotional perspective, a professional's perspective for us, or just a neutral's view of the World Cup and where this tournament is going to be heading. So in this segment, I'm going to look at one of the host nations, the USA. Obviously, a large section of our listenership are Americans. So I think that it's important that we address our expectations for that. Obviously, same reasons. England are going to be looked upon. We've got Argentina as the holders that we're going to address. And then I'll look at the favourites, which are considered to be Spain largely. So that's what we'll be in this segment. And then in the final bit, we'll wrap up all the other bits that we think are interesting, including Brazil, Portugal, Canada, and Mexico. But yeah, mate, let's start with the USA, because obviously they're trying to hype it up, right? Trump thinks they should win it. Fox seem to think that people should be able to dream of winning it, given their new advertising campaign and all the rest of it. And obviously, Americans, just from a culture point, are usually in things to win it. They're not usually at a tournament to make up numbers. Now, the US soccer fan base, like, are realistic enough to know that that's not going to happen. Like, the USA aren't going to win this World Cup. But what is possible? What is realistic? And I think that that's where our starting point should be right here. So in terms of their group, USA begin against Paraguay, then play Australia and end with Turkey, which I think is pretty good, because having Turkey as the last game, I think, is ideal, because for me, that's their toughest game. And for Turkey, they might be sorted by that point as well. It might be that game decides who comes out on top, but ultimately I think that game might just be about who comes first and second. Now, what then are the expectations in those two areas, winning the group and coming second? Well, ideally win the group, obviously. You get to the round of 32, the first knockouts, and you're going to be playing against a third place team in Santa Clara. Like, it's very hard to get knocked out of this World Cup. I do expect the US to go through the groups because there's even the best placed third teams that do emerge from it. You typically are going to face a very difficult fixture if you do come third. So it's not like that worthwhile, in my opinion. But ultimately, in the round of 32, if the US win their group, then they will play against a third place team. And that'll be good. And then in the round of 16, they would most likely face Belgium. That looks like the highest probability as we look at it and predict what happens right now, which is difficult, but not impossible. I think that if Mauricio Pochettino is going to earn his wedge here and show why US Soccer brought him in the first place, it's that he's at some point he's got to make a difference, right? And I think the US do have a good chance of winning their group because, one, they typically do have a good start to tournaments. I think that there will be a big moment that arrives within those first three games where they make a statement. And I think that they'll be okay. Then you get to that round of 16 and say it is Belgium. Like, that's your big test. That's the big point. And if you can make it through that, Jack, then that's probably about as good as it's going to get, because you're likely to meet Spain in the quarterfinals. And like, as much as I'd love to be here in America and see the US progress through a game like that, I can't see it for the life of me. So that's where I'd have to see them topping out in that scenario. Now, if they came second, the round of 32 game would probably be something like Egypt, which would be okay.
Or Iran. I do think that that's a really interesting group G, that Belgium will fancy themselves to win as the kind of top seeded side in it. But I think that we could have a very interesting battle between Egypt and Iran for that second spot. And again, I wouldn't quite count New Zealand out, although I think that they are the wild card there. Yeah. But I think that if you got Egypt or Iran there, that would throw up a very, very interesting tie in the round of 32 if that came to pass. And to be honest, I'm not as confident as you are. with the US.
I think I'm just around more Americans, mate, that are playing this up.
Yeah, look, I like this side, and I think that there are signs that there have been serious improvements, and I think that there is a possibility. But the fact that it was Turkey and they've just got that attacking prowess, I think even if they end up drawing that final game, they'll probably top out the group on goal difference, which I think is probably something beyond the capabilities of this US side. So Egypt or Iran in a round of 32, I think would be a pretty good place for the US to be, although the round of 16 gets a bit mucky if they do that.
Yeah, round of 16, you're likely to face Argentina. So that's less than ideal, isn't it?
Pochettino would like that.
It's a big one for Pochettino, isn't it? I mean, that is going to be one of the ties of the tournament. If that is what we get, Pochettino facing up against his homeland. So that's kind of one of the things that, you know, we start to see now when you get a lot of nations being managed by people from other countries. So that could be interesting. But ultimately, mate, I think like you do have to get a grip on what the genuine expectation could be for the US. But I equally think that there is a lot of skepticism about what's possible. Can they get out of the group? Can they even win a knockout game? And I genuinely think the answer to those two things is yes. Do I think they will get to the World Cup final and that the Fox ad will play out and they score this dramatic thing and everybody should dream because anything can happen? No, I don't think anything like that can happen. I don't think US can win the World Cup. But that doesn't mean it would be a failure. Like, obviously, this is the problem for a lot of neutral Americans that they have, because what's the point of watching if we haven't got a chance of winning it? And I understand that. But ultimately, if you can even get to a round of 16 against Argentina or a quarter final against Spain on the biggest stage in the world and at least compete in that game, I think that honestly, that is success.
No, I'd agree. I'd absolutely agree with that, and I think it's important to kind of look at it from those perspectives. And maybe, you know, you and I as Fulham fans are conditioned that, you know, success is not just silverware, right? Like success can come in this game in many different forms. And if success was winning the major titles, then there would be 99.9% of football fans upset every single year, right? Because, you know, you have to define it in your own terms. I think that reaching a quarterfinal would be a major success. I think reaching a round of 16 game would be a success. I think getting out of the groups is maybe par, right? Like, and I don't think that's probably where I've got to on it from US perspective. And look, other people will have different perspectives on that. People will have that one along, right? They might have it as, you know, reaching the round of 16 is par, and you kind of go from there. But that's kind of how I see it. I think that it's going to be very interesting to see what the approach is and what the feeling around it is at this point. But I think for me, you know, getting to a big game against a big nation, you know, we talked about Argentina and Spain there as potentially being there. And, you know, even if that is in the round of 16 and you end up getting knocked out with a competitive performance, I think you can look at that and say, okay, you know, we've kind of gone about our business and really kind of shown what we're capable of on our home soil. And I think that that's the important thing when it comes to this.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think that would be, yeah. Look, I'm excited. I am excited. USA, please at least be competitive in those early phases of the tournament, because it's important for the feel of this World Cup that they give it a go. Let's move up.
It's also important for my job working as a US-facing football broadcaster.
Yeah, I guess it is, isn't it? I guess it is. But look, let's be optimistic for now, while we can be, about what is possible for the US. Okay, let's then move it on to England, who have an interesting group: Croatia, Ghana, and Panama. And I'll be honest, I think that having Croatia first definitely makes this interesting. If England do win that game, then it's a breeze from then. They'll end up with, they'll get 3 wins out of 3. But if they stumble a little bit against Croatia, then I wonder about the Ghana game. And then I wonder how many goals they'll score against Panama in that final match to get through to the next round. Like, England will progress from this, and I do genuinely expect them to win the group. But at the moment, I've got my doubts about everything clicking together. And that's that's a big problem, I think, that could hold them back in this tournament. And if it's anything like the last time around under Gareth Southgate, and fans just becoming irritated, and there's that friction that starts to exist, I do worry a little bit. But if they win the group, then it's going to be a really interesting and exciting pathway that starts to open up for England. And if they do win the group, I do expect there to be more buoyancy in the camp and that things could go well. So win the group and you get a round of 32 against a third place team. Happy days. And then round of 16, you're likely to face Mexico, which I've seen a lot of people talking about this game being played at altitude in Mexico City, right? People are trying to suggest that evens things up a little bit. I mean, perhaps it does. Maybe I'm underplaying that, but I would expect England to beat Mexico.
I think if England win the group, as you say, it looks quite nice as a route. Like, and look, you can get up and anyone can finish third, and you can kind of have the first game slip up from someone, and suddenly you end up with, you know, kind of a random side in the round of 32 that you're like, oh, didn't want that, and haven't been given a nice end of the draw. These things happen, right? We talk about them in the Champions League all the time when we come to the league phase, and you're like, oh, I missed out on the top 8 by one spot. I finished 9th. So we've got the team that came 32nd or 24th in the group table, and that was Inter's detriment, right? They ended up with Bodo Glimt, and out of the competition they went, who found themselves in the right kind of buoyancy and the right kind of moment at the right time. You look back to the Euros that Portugal won, right, in 2016, they kind of squeezed out of the group in third place with 3 draws, and then ended up all the way to the final and winning that tournament. So, like, you can be slipped up, and just saying a third place team doesn't necessarily imply that the draw is going to be kind.
No.
But it suggests that you're going to, you know, you have more chance of that happening in your favor. If they got that and it was a fine draw, and then they got Mexico, even in the Azteca, which obviously has some dark memories for England, I think that they would fancy that. And I think that they would fancy Brazil in the quarters, which is the kind of most likely one you'd get at this point, given the fact that Brazil feel a little bit all over the place.
I don't know.
At the moment.
I don't know. I think that history goes against us here. I think that this is the part where I start to, as an Englishman, I get cold feet. I start to remember our frailties. I start to get nervous. And unfortunately, this is what I imagine the team doing. They'll start to play within themselves. It's really important that, you know, by the time they get to Brazil, if they get to Brazil in the quarterfinal, they'd have played 5 games, which is a lot, right? And they have to have a rhythm by that point, and they have to have an identity. No drama in the camp. And if we can get to that stage, head to Miami to take on Brazil, then I'll feel okay. But if there's anything, Jack, that comes up, and if Brazil are playing well, I'm going to be dreading it. I'm going to be absolutely dreading it. And I think that there's a high possibility that is England's exit point, right? If they make it through that, what do we get in the semi? Like, probably Argentina.
But like, if you make it through that, then you, like, in the last 4, you're expecting it to be like unbelievably difficult, right? Like it's kind of by the by that point. I think once you get to the last 4, you're expecting to come up against world-class, absolute top of the range opposition. Like there should be no gimmies, there should be no buys in the semi-finals. That's not how things work. Yeah. And I think if you've got to that point, then you're in with a shot. You're 180 minutes effectively away from lifting the trophy. Everyone should fancy themselves at that point to go on and kind of give the best of what they've got. I think the route to that point is where it gets interesting. And you're right. And in the same way that you're talking about England potentially building up ahead of steam, there is no reason why Brazil can't do that. I think that right now, this Brazil squad feels a little bit dysfunctional still. I don't think we've got to the point where I can look at this Brazil side and say, yeah, I know exactly what it's going to look like. I know that they're going to feel it and kind of find their way. But you could say the same for England. And I think that means that is a very interesting game that you kind of judge a little bit further on. But the route, I think itself, by winning the group, is one that on paper looks plausible.
Yeah, I think it's a mentality thing for me. You know, Brazil always expect to win a World Cup and England don't. That's my big problem. Once you get
the fear of that yellow shirt is embedded deeply in you from 2002.
It genuinely is. I don't want that game. I'm already dreading it. Might not even happen. I'm dreading it.
You got to get there first.
Yeah.
So do they.
And I know we're mapping out routes to the final here, but like you say, like I'm only really mapping it out to the semi-final because like we don't know exactly what we're getting by the time we're predicting 6 games by the time we're getting to a semi-final. And as you say, any game you face in a semi-final is going to be extremely difficult anyway. So that's where I get with England winning the group. The big problem, I guess, for England is if they don't win the group and they come second, because they'll face a round of 32 game, likely against Colombia. And then in the round of 16, there's a high chance you're getting Spain. And that might be it. I mean, that's a disaster for Thomas Tuchel, isn't it? To be going out in a round of 16, even though it's to Spain, there's no harm. It's not that you've lost to Spain. It's that you've failed to win the group. And then you're leaving the tournament 3 games early when Gareth Southgate has had such a good record of getting to semi-finals and finals, and how you are then reflecting on failing to take things forward from that point. So it is actually, for me, extremely important that England do go and win that group.
Okay, alrighty. Let's shift things onwards. What you got for me next?
Well, let's do the holders, Argentina. I don't think that they will retain the trophy. Then again, I didn't think PSG would retain the Champions League, and they've got a chance of doing that. So don't take too much weight in my personal opinion. But let's look at what they are tasked with if they're going to do that. It's a nice group. I don't think that anyone's going to say otherwise. Algeria, Austria, Jordan to get into the knockout stages of the World Cup. Thank you very much. I think, you even get a chance to kind of, there's all the questions right now about whether Messi's at the World Cup, like what's his role at the World Cup. I mean, to be honest, you might largely get away without even playing him in the group stages if you really wanted to. If you wanted to rest Messi and save him for the knockouts, then you could probably do it, or at least leave him in reserve in case you need a moment of magic, right? And then, this is what I would do. I'd get through the group, win the group. You're Argentina, you should go and win the group. I know this didn't work out in the last World Cup, by the way, and they came to life in the second half of the tournament. But round of 32 in Miami against Uruguay, that's when I want to see the real Argentina come to life. And I do think that this competition could easily split, and obviously we've seen it before a few times, but specifically more recently where teams can stumble in those group stages, but then you see a completely different tournament once it gets to the knockout phases and the approach that is taken to that. And maybe we see that again with them. But Uruguay in Miami in the last 32 feels like it could be a big game within this World Cup, right?
I mean, what's really interesting for me is I agree with you that this is a relatively kind group, although I do think that starting with Algeria and then having Austria second is not the ideal way that they would go into it. I think this is a very good Austria side. Now, maybe not good enough to knock out the holders, fair enough, but I think that they're a very good side. And Algeria have been excellent in qualification and have a load of players who can hurt you. We know Argentina started the last World Cup slow. The problem is that neither of the routes, for finishing first or second is particularly kind. I don't think. A grudge match against Uruguay. Now, we've seen that game before, right? It's obviously one that's kind of high tempers. I've been in both Argentina and Uruguay in the last couple of months. And hearing them speak about each other is very, very funny, right? Like in terms of how things are. They're just across the River Plata, but there is a real cultural divide in some ways between the two nations. That would be an absolute grudge match. And if they don't win the group and they come second, they probably get Spain in the round of 32. So you're not really in an ideal position, either winning it or coming second in that group, which is an odd one. And I know that, in all of these situations, and we can talk about any team like this, to be the man, you got to beat the man, etc. And I'm with you in that I don't necessarily think that Argentina are as favoured going into this World Cup as they were in the last. I really did fancy them ahead of the last World Cup, and that proved to be a good prediction in terms of what it was. But I do think that they're an interesting side in that I think they're really, really, really difficult to beat. And that, I think, is the kind of thing, as much as I think that Spain and France are both ahead of where Argentina are right now, I'd hate to be the side that had to beat them. And I think that gives them an edge in a lot of these games in just terms of like, wow, even if they get to the knockouts, even if they came third in the group, which I think is effectively like the baseline, absolutely like the lowest it could go. Like, I still think that they just start to turn it on. And it's a weird one for them in that Uruguay is a grudge match. Spain, I think, probably are the best team in the world right now. But you're looking at it and thinking, actually, do they mind that? Because they will fancy themselves in terms of beating any of these teams in their own right, just in those one-off knockout games, more than perhaps it is about like, we need to predict our route. And I think Argentina is slightly unique in that regard. I think with pretty much all of the other favorites, you look at Spain, you look at France, England, etc. we talked about, you look at them and thinking, yeah, how do they plot the route? I don't think Argentina will be thinking like that in the same kind of way. It's like, right, who's going to come and beat us then? And I think that gives them a slightly different edge to everyone else.
The thing is, right, if you were to follow a team to the final, it's Argentina you want to follow because they have got the glamour route to the final if you want big matchups. So say they get Uruguay in Miami for that round of 32 game, right, after winning the group. And then they go through to play possibly USA in the last 16. So you've got the glamour of playing the hosts and everything that comes with that. Say you get through that. You've then got Portugal. You've got Ronaldo against Messi in a quarterfinal of the World Cup, potentially, of course, but assuming both of them are able to get to that stage of it. And then in the semi-final, Brazil or England could be there. Like, that is honestly, like, if you were going to follow a team, I do think that Argentina would bring the most glamour and the biggest fixtures.
I mean, look, there's obviously a history there with England, and that would be a massive semi-final in its own right. But the idea of there being an Argentina-Brazil semi-final in this World Cup gives me shivers. I'm like, wow, that is just really.
I think I could
something,
accept going out just to watch that one. Yeah, if you tell me England are going to win it anyway, I'll just go out early and watch that Argentina-Brazil game.
100%. 100%. I mean, what a game that would be.
Yeah. Look, let's round things off for this segment with a look at Spain because they are most people's favourites. And they'll get through the group. They should get through the group at least with relative ease. Cape Verde first up, then Saudi Arabia and Uruguay. If they didn't win that group,
that's a nice order. That's the order you want.
Yeah.
You want Cape Verde as your opener, and I know that they'll be excited, and I really like this Cape Verde team, but it's Spain, and I expect them to come out with a kind of flourish. Then Saudi Arabia, which is kind of an uptick a little bit in terms of they'll fancy their chances of being party poopers again. And then finally, you get the Uruguay game. You're almost building into the World Cup in the way that you'd want. And I think that's the nicest thing about Spain's group for them. Not that the opposition is that soft, but actually the order of it gives them a kind of increasing levels of difficulty, which I think is interesting.
And the thing is, it just continues in that same manner because if that was to all go to plan in the 32, you get Austria or Algeria, which is again, decent level, but this is Spain, so they'll see them off.
Or Argentina.
Colombia or Croatia next up. Again, tough, but not that tough. And obviously, let's just keep pointing out, like, this is our predetermined guesses at like who's going to make it to the stage, but this is our best guesstimate as to how things open up. Quarterfinal, you then say get USA or Belgium, and a semi-final against France or Germany. So it could be realistic that Spain get through a lot of this tournament without really being properly tested until those very late stages. And I think that would be very interesting if that was to happen, because you are gradually building up, but suddenly, when some of the other teams have had a bigger test in the quarterfinal, or maybe even before that, you're suddenly at the semi-final, you've got to bring your A game.
Yeah, I mean, look, that can work in both ways, right? You can look at that in two different kind of categories. One being, obviously, you want that to be, to be able to build in it. And I do think, especially in the group, that's really important. The other one is if you get to that point and you've effectively cruised to the semi-finals, and I'm not saying that's necessarily going to happen. I think that some of those matchups are a little bit more difficult than perhaps we're painting a little bit. But when you're kind of looking at it from the perspective of, you get to a semi-final and then suddenly it's France, you're like, oh, wow, okay, that's a step up that maybe you were kind of waiting for, that you haven't necessarily been kind of paid into yet. And that can work against you. But I think that this Spain side are pretty locked in, considering the way that they performed at the last Euros.
Yeah, I think so too, mate. Right, let's take a break there. And then when we come back, I'll run through some other runners and riders.
Welcome back to Ranks FC, where we're looking at some potential routes through to the latter stages of the World Cup, potentially even that big showpiece final at MetLife. Jack Collins and Dean Jones alongside you. And Dean, should we talk about France? We talked about Spain. Let's talk about France.
Yeah, let's talk about France. They are in Group I. There's so many groups in this World Cup, Jack. Like, I'm finding it so difficult. Normally at a World Cup, you quite quickly get into your head the groups and stuff. But seeing as we go up to L at this World Cup, extremely difficult to, off the top of your head, just reel off these groups. And I'm trying my best, I promise you. But it's not natural yet. And I'm still having to have my database or my notes in front of me. And I do, for this episode, literally have written notes as well as all the things jotted down on my laptop. Listen, France begin against Senegal, which is a big matchup.
Throwback.
Yeah, lots of historical crossovers there. And then they go on to play Iraq in their second game and then Norway in the third game. It should be fine. This should be fine.
This is a horrible. I mean, look, it's the group of death, right? Like, and I
suppose a group of death, but I
think
they should be fine.
I mean, they'll qualify, I think, and there's no real doubt about that. And look, right now, I have kind of France pegged as favourites, not because I think they're necessarily a better team than Spain, but I think they'll probably avoid the infighting because it's Deschamps' last camp, and also the fact that their preparations have involved going to their hotel and playing on the pitches they're going to be playing on. I think they've probably nailed the prep maybe harder than anyone else. But that's not an easy first game against the reigning AFCON champions, and no CAF, it's not Morocco. But you kind of look at it and think, okay, so it's a tough opener and potentially slightly less difficult second game. And then that final game against Norway, who are the kind of pot C team that nobody wanted. Like, that is not an easy matchup, but we are going to get the Mbappe Erling Haaland thing that was touted so many years ago.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's fun. At least we get that sort of matchup at that stage. But I think maybe having that game last is fine. I do think that France go here. So I'm predicting that France do top the group. If that comes to light, then obviously they'll play against a third placed team in their first knockout game. And then things could get interesting quite quick, couldn't they? Because they play most likely Germany. Yeah, we get a last 16 tie, which would see France meet Germany. That's big. That's big. And one of the early big clashes of this World Cup is penciled in there at least.
Yeah, I mean, look, if they don't win the group, which I think they will do, but if they were not to win the group, they'd effectively play the runners-up in Group E in the round of 32, which I think is probably likely to be Cote d'Ivoire.
Yep.
And then they maybe run into Brazil.
Yeah, I mean,
would you rather run into Brazil than Germany, given the current state of those two teams? I don't know. Like, I'm not 100%
mate, that is really
sure.
difficult. And like, I know that like a lot of people do have France as their favourites to win this tournament, but like the more you consider like this run, like, that is such a big early test. And obviously, like, the big positive of that is if you come through, if you beat Germany or Brazil in a last 16, then you're off and running, aren't you? Like that's there's not too many bigger tests that you can face in world football that are going to leave you feeling daunted. So I think maybe it will end up working in their favour. When you're a team of the prestige of France, you shouldn't really care, I guess, who you're going to face. I still think they'd fare better against Germany, but that's just my personal feeling.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be interesting. But it does feel like some of these is like, is it better to come second? I mean, I suppose not, right? You want to get motoring and you want to get going. And if you're in France, you just want to win every game in front of you. But I don't know. Part of me thinks that route out of it after coming second, and look, again, Ecuador or Cote d'Ivoire wouldn't be an easy ride, especially that Ecuador team that just don't concede goals. But I do wonder if that's actually an easier route than perhaps what they would actually get. So, yeah, it's a strange one. It's a strange one, but I'm sure that they won't be thinking like this.
No, I don't think so. Brazil is really interesting. Just to quickly address their chances.
It feels like we've mentioned them in everyone else's route.
I know, but I just have a feeling about Brazil at this World Cup. I don't know what it is, but like, even since I first mentioned them in our first World Cup podcast of this season, and I realised that they weren't really that fancied by people, I've noticed that they're creeping up. I've noticed people are starting to talk about them a bit more. And it doesn't really count for much, but I just think that this is a narrative that is going to grow. But equally, it could implode one game in. If Brazil crash and burn against Morocco straight away, then suddenly they've got big questions asked of them, and it obviously changes the outlook of winning the group, which is going to be what they're aiming to do. If they win their Group C, then they would play in the round of 32, second place from Netherlands, Japan, Tunisia, and Sweden, and then they can get on their merry way and start trying to win things. But as you say, like Brazil, they're not going to face an easy task here. Like throughout this tournament, as it emerges, they're going to have some big games. I just feel it's that mentality that exists for them that will help them overcome the doubts that people have about how good are this team. Because you're always comparing them to great Brazil teams.
Sure.
And the thing is, I'm also thinking about just football in general at the moment, and football's not that great at the moment in general. Do you know what I mean? Like it might be a season when vibes can get you through, Jack.
And they've got the master in Carlo Ancelotti at the helm. So perhaps I'm struggling to get past the old Sam Tighe assertion that the teams with the best players usually win. And right now, I don't think that this Brazil squad has many of the world's best players in it. So maybe things are different. Maybe they adapt to the situation. Maybe they come together and bind around that. But I'm just struggling with it in terms of where they are. But I think you're right in that, to win there and maybe come up against Japan, that's a difficult last 32 game, or Tunisia, who have had a good qualification campaign themselves. Like that's a tricky tie in the last 32. And then you'd get potentially either, the Ivory Coast or Ecuador you spoke about, or whoever comes second in that France group, which could be Senegal, could be Norway. That's a very, very difficult run of fixtures. Whereas you're kind of looking at it and thinking, okay, if they don't top their group, they potentially play the Netherlands. I mean, look, I think that group's quite up for grabs. And I do wonder if Japan comes storming out of the blocks in that group. But then it might be Germany or France. So there's no easy routes here for Brazil either. And I do think it's interesting that we talk about some of these routes and be like, well, you've got to beat someone to kind of get going. I don't know if that's going to be the case for this Brazil side. I think they will want the softest possible run to get themselves into the flow of things. And if they can do that, maybe they can harness some of the magic that has seemed to go out of that shirt in recent years.
Yeah, I think you're right. Let's see. Quickly, let's address Portugal. There'll be a lot of Ronaldo fans listening, I'm sure, that just want to know, like, what are his chances? Well, we don't even know what kind of role he will play at this World Cup. As it stands right now, what we do know is that Portugal will begin against the Democratic Republic of Congo. They'll play Uzbekistan. Both of those games are in Houston, Texas. And then they'll round things off in Miami against Colombia in the groups.
You'd imagine that's quite a partisan support there for Colombia.
You imagine that what it's going to be like. So let's assume they win the group. They'll get a third place team.
Well, they have to win their group.
Yeah.
Like if they don't win their group, they're in major trouble. Because if they don't win their group, I think they get Spain in the last 32, which is just like, you can't have that. Not only obviously the Iberian rivals are the closest nations to each other, but like that is not what you want with a Portugal team that are still kind of trying to work themselves out. And they really are one of the teams that just needs to go and win their group.
Yeah. But as we've just spoken about previously, if they win their group and if Argentina win their group, then ultimately those two end up facing each other in a quarterfinal shootout, and we get Ronaldo versus Messi for the last time ever. I'm here for it. Are you here for it? Do you want to see it? Do you think we'll see it?
I think we might see it because, like, I do think that this is a group that Portugal can win. And again, their schedule is quite soft in that they kind of grow into it before they play that final game against Colombia. I'd like to see it, although I think it is one of those things that maybe will get a load of hype and won't necessarily deliver as a brilliant football match. So I would hate for it to overshadow other things that are going on. But I think for the hype train, and I think it would be would it be in Kansas if that was the actual game that came up, which would be kind of nuts.
Yeah, it would be
in many different ways. Like I don't think I'm there being like I'm desperate to see that match up one more time. I think that there's plenty of respect around that. You know, my thoughts on that conversation have been long due on this podcast. But I think that for Portugal's sake, and obviously having married into a Portuguese family, they need to win this group. And that route feels less aggressive. If they get to that point where they're in a quarterfinal, they'll have, won at least 4 of 5 games, right? And they're suddenly in a conversation where if this team gets ticking, we know the amount of talent in this Portugal squad, right? Like there is an absurd amount of talent. It's about how you balance it, about how you make it all tick, about how everyone works for each other. If they've got to that point where they have won 4 of 5 games, I think that could be a really good quarterfinal in terms of, not necessarily in terms of being a 3-2 thriller, but I think it'd be quite a battle. Whereas I think if Portugal don't win the group and they end up second and playing Spain in the round of 32, they have very little chance, despite the fact that they obviously won that Nations League final against them. I really struggled to see how Portugal come out on top of that.
Yeah, very good. One of the other favourites is Germany. I'm not going to spend too much time on them, but they are obviously always in the mix with all these teams that we have been speaking about. They will be expected to win their group. They have a group against Curacao, Ivory Coast, and Ecuador. I don't know. I just have my doubts about Germany getting into the latter stage of this tournament. I don't know if you agree, Jack. I don't know where you sit with Germany.
I think that I was impressed with them at the last Euros, but it's been a little bit of a disaster since. There's been some very, very disappointing results in the mix. And that Nations League knockout and, the way that they've gone about their business hasn't been quite what maybe we expected. I thought that they might kick on after the Euros, and they haven't really. So I think that there is a fair amount of skepticism, and I think that is fair, like considering where they are right now. But I do expect them to work things out. I really like Nagelsmann as a manager. I feel like he has tools at his disposal which he can utilize and be able to carve something out with this Germany side. And again, they're another one that if they get rolling and there is a belief and they start to really play in these group stages, I think they might be one to watch.
Okay, cool. Let's end with the other 2 host nations. Neither of them are going to win the tournament, but we've got to address them and they deserve respect. Canada will start against Bosnia and Herzegovina. That one is in Toronto. The next 2 will be in Vancouver against Qatar and then Switzerland. This is not an easy group. This is a tough start for them.
Switzerland win this group, hands down, by the way.
That's why the first game is so tough against Bosnia. It's so key to get off to a good start, because if they lose to Bosnia, I'm assuming they'll lose to Switzerland, and you're just going to have those points against Qatar. So are you going to get through? I hope they do. I really hope Canada can come out of this group and get to the round of 32. If they win their group, which I don't think they will, they would be able to stay in Vancouver for both the round of 32 and the round of 16. They finish second, they'll be heading straight out of Canada and down to LA for their second game, and then remaining out of Canada for the rest of the tournament. Same case if they were to finish as a best third placed team. If Canada can make the knockouts and be competitive in their round of 32 game, then I think they would have done pretty well, if I'm honest with you. I know that I was with a Canadian reporter last week. He's got quiet optimism about the fact that if they can get out of their group, then they might be able to get to that round of 16 game. But, there's cautious optimism, as I say, about what is really possible for them.
I mean, look, the last World Cup, they played some really nice football. They gave a really good account of themselves, I think, in multiple games, but weren't over to get those into results. And that was, the downfall of that. But it kind of gave them a platform to work from. We know that they're going to come in here. We know they're going to be competitive. We know how a Jesse Marsch side is going to set up. It is a difficult group. And I think that they will struggle to top it. But I do think also when you kind of look at it and think, okay, that first game against Bosnia at home crowd, can you feed off that energy? Can you ride that wave? If they can do that and they win that game against Bosnia, I think they will be through. That'll be enough to take them through. That's a big moment. And if that can happen, then suddenly you're kind of looking at it. As long as they maintain a level of, as we say, if you can stay in Vancouver and Toronto, that's a great thing in terms of what the crowds are going to be like and what kind of the atmosphere is like supporting you. That I think is the best hope they have of kind of putting together a deep run. But equally, we've talked about the US a lot here. And I think if you actually ask anyone over the last sort of 12, 24 months, which of those two sides has put together a more convincing build up to this World Cup, the answer is Canada. They have a more difficult group, I think, and therefore it's a little bit different in terms of what it looks like. But, if they get off to a good start, we know that the intensity that they can maintain, we know that there's quality in this squad that they can utilize. But I don't want to write Canada off because I think that they are the kind of team that if they do get a win under their belts early, the confidence is going to grow within this group that they can do something special on home soil. And that puts them, if they could win the first two and they go into that last game against Switzerland being like, maybe a draw tops the group here, and obviously it depends on goal difference, et cetera, fine. But then suddenly you've got a massive thing to play for, which is home advantage through the next two rounds. That's an exciting thing to be able to play for. Again, as I said before, I think Switzerland top this group. I think they're a really good side. But if you get to that final game and you're level on points, then you give everyone such hope that this could be a special moment. That I think is the kind of energy they need to feed off through this group stage.
Yeah, good stuff. Look, let's finish off the episode with Mexico, who could have a very nice first 5 games of the tournament if they can win this group. They will kick off against South Africa in Mexico.
This is the most open group of the lot, by the way. And I have absolutely no idea.
They've got an opportunity for sure. They've got South Africa first up in Mexico City, then a week later, South Korea in Guadalajara, and then they've got Czech Republic for their final game back in Mexico City. And if they win their group, then the way that the schedule opens up means they get their next 2 games, then first 2 knockout games, also in Mexico City.
Same as Canada, right? Like the winning the group holds home advantage.
The reward is there. You do get that. If you don't get it, then you're not playing again in Mexico for the rest of the tournament. Bit harsh, to be honest, but that's the way it's set up. Top in the group would see them play a best placed third team first up. And then you're getting to that Azteca last 16 clash with England. So if you want to take it on from there, then beat England and you get Brazil in Miami, and that's when World Cup memories are truly made. If you beat England and you go and play against Brazil, but Mexico are a hard team to read. I genuinely don't know what we're getting from them. It's definitely possible that they could get to the point where they can play against England and they can attempt to take them on. It's equally possible that they underperform, and I really hope for the sake of their fans that they do not do that at this tournament.
I do think it's very interesting that if Mexico comes second, you could end up with a Mexico-Canada game in LA in the round of 32, which could just be loads of fun, right? When was the last time we saw 2 host nations clash at a World Cup in the third host nation? The answer is never. But that would be, part of me is like, that would be so much fun. That would be, I like that. That would be so much fun. So, I mean, look, I hope that both of them hold serve and I hope both of them get those 5 games on home soil. But if they don't, that is a very, very fun little side bit to keep an eye on.
Brilliant. That was fun, mate. I think I'll leave it there. I've run out of breath. Yeah,
100%. Well, thank you very much for leading this episode. It's been a whole host of fun working through all of these games. So all that's left for me to do, say thank you very much to Mr. Dean Jones.
Cheers, mate.
I've been Jack Collins. This has been Ranks FC. Thank you so much for listening as ever. And we'll see you all very, very shortly, Rank Squad. Take it easy. Peace.